She was 97 years old, completely alone, and the sky had turned green. Through her kitchen window, she watched 79 Hells Angels pull into her driveway. Leather, chrome, and tattooed arms, the kind of men that towns lock their doors against. The tornado was 8 minutes out. She had one cellar. She looked at them. She looked at the sky. And without hesitating for a single second, she opened the door. What happened in that house during the storm, nobody expected. What happened 11 days later, when 300 of them came back, that changed everything. Not just for her, for all of them. Because sometimes the person everyone's afraid of is exactly the person you need. I've been writing for 53 years. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. 53 years on asphalt, through 41 states, through heat that warped the road in front of my eyes, and cold that made my knuckles crack inside my gloves. I've seen things on the road that most people wouldn't believe, and a few things I still have trouble believing myself. But nothing, not one single mile of all those miles, prepared me for what happened in Millhaven, Kansas on a Tuesday in late September. I was 59 that year, younger than I am now, older than I felt. I'd been writing with the chapter for 22 years by then, long enough that the road had stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like home, which is a different thing. Freedom is what you feel when you leave. Home is what you feel when you don't know where else you'd be. We were coming back from the county fair, 3 towns over, 79 of us, which was a good turnout for a Tuesday. James had organized it the way James organized most things, by saying we were going and assuming everyone would follow, which they usually did because James Calloway had a way of making the next thing feel like the only reasonable option. He was our chapter president, 52 years old, gray in the beard, quiet in the way that men get quiet when they've made enough decisions to stop talking about making them. I'd ridden with him for 15 years. I knew him well enough to know when he was watching the sky. He started watching the sky about 30 miles outside Millhaven. Now, I grew up in central Kansas. My mother's family had been farming that land since before the First World War. And I want to tell you something about growing up in tornado country. You learn the sky the way other people learn faces. You learn its moods. You learn the difference between a sky that's just dark and a sky that's deciding something. And that afternoon, about 20 miles south of Millhaven on Route 17, the sky was deciding something. There's a color it gets. I've tried to describe it to people who didn't grow up there, and the closest I can get is this. It's the color of old brass in bad light, yellow-green, flat, like the sun is shining through something that shouldn't be there. When you see that color, you don't discuss it, you move. James pulled up beside me and pointed northeast. I nodded. I'd already seen it, a smear of rotation low on the horizon. 2 cloud formations moving in directions they had no business moving. We'd been in weather before. We'd pulled under overpasses, waited out hail in gas stations, ridden through rain so hard it felt personal. But this was something else, and we both knew it. He got on the radio, we used headset comms on long rides, and said 4 words. We need cover, now. That was James. 4 words when 4 words did the job. We came up Route 17 into Millhaven at a speed that was not strictly legal, and I want to be honest about that. We were scared. Not the kind of scared that makes you freeze, the other kind. The kind that makes your hands very steady and your thinking very clear. We needed a structure. We needed a basement or an interior room or a culvert, anything that wasn't open sky, and we needed it in the next 3 minutes. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the porch of a small white house on the corner of Alderman and Fifth. I learned the street names later. Standing straight as a fence post, both hands at her sides, looking southwest at the same sky we'd been watching. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. Her hair was white and pulled back, and she was wearing a blue cardigan over a house dress. And she was the most completely calm person I have ever seen in my life, in a moment that did not call for calm. James pulled his bike to a stop in front of her house. I pulled up behind him. 77 more bikes came in behind me, filling the street, engines cutting one by one until there was just the sound of the wind, which by then had a voice to it. James took off his helmet. He looked at the sky. He looked at her. "Ma'am," he said, and I've heard James Calloway speak in a lot of registers over the years, but I had never heard him sound quite like that, like a man asking for something he had no right to expect. "That's a tornado forming. Is there any chance?" "Get in the basement," she said. She didn't yell it. She didn't ask our names or our business or what patch we were wearing, or why 79 strangers on motorcycles had just filled her street. She looked at us the way you look at a problem that has a solution, and she said, "Get in the basement," and then she opened her front door and held it. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. 79 of us. Leather vests, patches, tattoos, the whole image that makes people cross to the other side of the street before we even get close. And this woman, 97 years old, alone, standing on a tilting porch in the wrong colored light. She opened the door and held it. James was the first one off his bike. I was the second. After that, it happened fast. I remember passing her in the doorway. I remember the smell of the house, soup on the stove, something clean like cedar, old wood that had been lived in for decades. I remember the sound of her voice behind me as I went down the basement stairs, calm and clear, still counting. She was counting us in, every single one of us, standing at the door of her own house with a tornado coming, making sure not one person got left outside. I'm 72 years old. I have met a lot of people in a lot of places, and I am telling you, I have never in my life met anyone like Evelyn Carter. The tornado lasted 11 minutes. I know because I counted too. Old habit from childhood. The way you count to manage what you can't control. In the basement of Evelyn Carter's house, 79 grown men sat in the near dark and listened to the world rearrange itself above us, and not one of us made a sound that I'd call anything other than respectful. I want you to understand what that basement was like, because I think about it still. It was a working basement, shelves along every wall, floor to ceiling, stocked with canned goods and mason jars, and the kind of organized inventory that speaks of a person who has never once assumed the world would provide what she needed without preparation. 30 years of canning, she'd said. I believed it. There was a water heater in the corner, wrapped in an old blanket, a workbench with tools hung on pegboard in the exact order you'd want them, a wooden stool in the center of the room that she sat on as if it were a throne. That's where she sat, center of the room, hands folded in her lap, while the walls groaned once and the single bulb on its cord swung in a slow arc. Evelyn Carter sat on her stool and waited with the patience of someone who has outlived enough storms, literal and otherwise, to know that waiting is not the same as helplessness. A big man near the back, we called him Brick, real name Frank Hollister. 300 pounds of Louisiana-raised quiet. Had his eyes closed the whole time. I figured he was praying. When he opened them and caught Evelyn looking at him, he nodded once, and she nodded back, and that was that. When the sound dropped, she stood up before any of us moved. "That's done," she said. "Let's see what we've got." I followed James up the stairs behind her. The kitchen was intact. There was a crack in the window above the sink, long and clean, but the glass had held. The front door was standing open. The wind had done that, and through it we could see the porch, and past the porch we could see the street. 3 of our bikes were down. A section of fence from up the block had crossed the road. The big elm in front of the neighbor's house had split at the trunk and taken a power line with it. But the house, her house, was standing the same as it had been, minus the left porch rail, which had been leaning before the storm anyway, as I later learned. I watched James look at the street. He had a way, when he was assessing damage, of going very still. Not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a man running numbers. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Your bikes," she said to him. "They'll ride," he said. Then, because James always came to the point, "The line's down. You're going to lose power." "I have a generator in the shed," she said. "Starts on the 3rd pull, if you're patient with it." Now, I've known James Calloway for 15 years. I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen something genuinely surprise him. That was one of them. Not because of the generator, because of the way she said it, like she was briefing him, like she had already decided he was someone worth telling the practical truth to. People didn't do that with James, as a rule. They got polite or they got nervous, but they didn't just brief him like a colleague. Evelyn Carter, apparently, had not received that particular memo. Some of the men had come up from the basement by then and were already moving without being asked, riding bikes, clearing the fence section from the road. Danny Pruitt, 23 years old, and the newest member of our chapter, had found a broom on the porch and was sweeping grit from the front steps with the focused attention of someone who needed a task and had found one. "You don't have to do that," Evelyn told him. "I know," he said, and kept sweeping. I liked her immediately after that, because she didn't push it. She watched him sweep, decided it was all right, and moved on. That's a kind of wisdom. Knowing when to stop arguing with someone who's already doing the right thing. Danny got the generator running on the 2nd pull. He came to find me afterward with an expression like he'd split the atom. I told him the 3rd pull was the one with character. He told me to mind my own business, which was the most I'd heard him say in a single sentence in weeks. James tried to pay her for the damage to the property. I heard the conversation from the porch where I was helping Carol, one of our few female members, silver-haired, practical as a socket wrench, assess the down power situation. "I want to pay for the damage," James said. "The porch rail has been loose since George W. Bush's 2nd term," Evelyn said. "I'm not charging you for gravity." I heard James go quiet. That meant she'd surprised him again. 2 surprises in 20 minutes was a record. She fed us before we left. 14 jars of vegetable soup from those basement shelves, warmed on the gas stove, served in mismatched bowls that told the history of 60 years of kitchen accumulation. We ate standing up, in the kitchen, on the porch, on the front lawn. 79 people eating out of the bowls of a woman who had opened her door to us because the sky was the wrong color and there wasn't time for anything else. Nobody broke a single bowl. I checked after. I don't know why I checked, but I did. When we were loading up to leave, I watched James go back to the porch. He stood there with his helmet under his arm, and I could see him trying to find the right way to end something that didn't have a clean ending. James was good at beginnings and middles. Endings were harder for him. I meant what I said about paying for the damage, he told her. I know you did, she said, and I meant what I said about not charging you. We're at an impasse. Have a safe ride. He nodded once, the kind of nod that carries more weight than its size suggests, and walked back to his bike. I pulled up beside him as we turned onto Route 17. The sky was clearing by then, that specific pale color that comes after a storm when the air has been wrung out and everything left standing is standing because it earned it. You all right? I asked him. Yeah, he said. And then, after a moment, she counted us in, Mike. I know, I said. Every single one. I know, I said again. We rode in silence for a while after that. Some things don't need more words than they already have. 3 days after the storm, James got a letter. He didn't tell me about it right away. James processed things privately first, always had. But when he did tell me, standing outside the chapter house in Wichita on a Thursday evening with 2 cups of gas station coffee between us, I understood why it had taken him a few days. He'd written to her, block letters, 1 sheet of paper, a phone number at the bottom. He told me what it said, that nobody had ever opened a door like that, and that we wouldn't forget it. She call? I asked. No, he said. He looked at his coffee. But she kept it. I know she kept it. I asked how he knew. Because she's the kind of person who keeps things, he said. And I believed him, because he was right. Some people you know in an hour, better than others you've known for years. And Evelyn Carter was that kind of person. It was James who had the idea. But it wasn't just James. It spread through the chapter, the way things spread when they've been sitting in everyone's chest, waiting for someone to name them. Within a week of the storm, there wasn't a member I'd talked to who hadn't thought about her. The woman who'd stood at her door in the wrong colored light, the woman with the soup and the mismatched bowls, and the generator that started on the second pull. James made calls, more calls than I know about probably. He reached out to other chapters, put the word out the way you put the word out when something matters but you don't want to make it sound like an order. By the time the following Saturday arrived, we had a count of over 300 confirmed riders. I helped plan the logistics, lumber, hardware, tools. Carol made a list of what the house needed based on what she'd seen. She had a builder's eye, and she'd used it while the rest of us were eating soup. The cracked window, the fence sections, the drainage situation under the house, the porch rail, obviously, in cedar. Carol specified the cedar without being asked because she'd noticed the old rail's grain and matched it. I want to tell you about the morning we arrived because I was there for all of it, and I want you to see it the way I saw it. We came up Route 17 the same way we'd come 9 days before, but this time the sky was clear and cold, the kind of Kansas October morning that feels like the world has been laundered overnight. I was near the front of the column, just behind James, and I watched Evelyn's street fill with motorcycles from the front all the way back to where I couldn't see anymore. 300 bikes. The sound of it was something I will carry to my grave. Not loud the way explosions are loud, but full, the way music is full when it's coming from somewhere that means it. She heard us coming. Of course she did. She was at the window when we turned onto her block, and by the time James reached her gate, she was on the porch in her coat, and her expression, I was close enough to see it, was not fear, and it was not confusion. It was the expression of someone recalibrating an expectation that had already been set low. James stopped at the bottom of her steps. He looked at the missing rail. He looked at her. "We're fixing your porch," he said. I heard her say, "And if I said I'd rather you didn't?" I heard him say, "Then we'd have hauled a lot of lumber a long way for nothing, and I'd ask you to let us do it anyway." There was a pause. I held my breath, which is not something I do often. "The rail needs to be cedar," she said. "Harold used cedar and it lasted 40 years. "We brought cedar," James said. She stepped back from the door. I have never, in 53 years on the road, seen 300 people work with that kind of order. Someone, James mostly, with help from Carol and a man named Greg Sutter, who ran a construction company in Topeka and had showed up with a truck full of equipment, had planned it down to the crew assignments. 4 people on the porch, a fence team, a crawl space team, an interior team for the window and the cabinet and the bathroom faucet, and a dozen other small things that had been quietly failing for longer than they should have. I worked on the fence with a man named Robert Hatch, who was about 70 himself and had a bad hip and the absolute refusal to let the bad hip affect his output. We didn't talk much. That's the kind of work that doesn't need talking. You find the rhythm of it together, and you stay in it. Evelyn sat in a lawn chair we'd moved to the side of the yard and watched everything. She answered questions when people came to her. "Where does this latch? How high was this step? Is there a shut-off for the spigot?" And she answered each one precisely and without elaboration. And I could tell that people liked that about her. In a world of people who over-explain, there was something almost relieving about a person who just told you the thing. At noon, someone set up a folding table and food appeared. Brisket wrapped in foil, sandwiches, fruit, coffee in carriers from a chain in town. Somebody had planned that too. I found out later it was Danny Pruitt, which surprised me until it didn't. I sat near Evelyn while I ate. I introduced myself properly for the first time. "Michael Rourke," I said. "Been writing with this chapter 22 years. She looked at me the way she looked at most things, directly, without decoration. "You were the second one off your bike," she said, "after James." I stared at her. "You remember that?" "I counted you in," she said, as if that explained it completely, which I suppose it did. I asked her how she was managing after the storm. She said fine, which I believed in the sense that she was a person who made fine happen through effort rather than circumstance. I asked if she had family nearby. She said her daughter was in Denver and called on Sundays. She said it without bitterness, just as a fact, but it was the kind of fact that has weight, and I felt the weight of it and didn't say anything more about it, because some weights you don't press on. By 3 in the afternoon, the porch rail was up. Cedar, straight, finished to a degree that made the rest of the porch look shabby. Evelyn pointed this out. James said they could address that too. She said she'd think about it. He said they'd be back regardless. I believed him. I think she did too. Riding home that evening, with the last of the October light going sideways across the Kansas flats, I found myself thinking something I hadn't thought in a long time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not just on the road, in the story, in the thing that was happening. Some rides take you somewhere. That one took us somewhere I hadn't known we were going. We came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. By the 3rd week, it had settled into something none of us had formally agreed to, but all of us understood. A smaller group, rotating, 8 or 12 or 15 of us, showing up on Saturday mornings with coffee and whatever the house still needed. And the house, it turned out, had needed more than we'd first seen. Not because it was falling apart, because it had been maintained by one person alone for a very long time. And one person alone can only see so far into the corners. I came most weeks. I told myself it was because I lived closest. Wichita to Millhaven was 40 minutes on the highway, but that wasn't the whole truth, and I knew it. The whole truth was that I had not felt useful in a particular way in some years, and those Saturday mornings had that feeling. The feeling of a job that mattered, done alongside people you trusted, for someone who deserved it. I watched James change over those weeks. I want to be careful how I say this, because James Calloway was not a man who changed visibly. He didn't become warmer or more talkative or different in any way you could photograph. But there was something in him that shifted, the way a heavy object shifts when the weight redistributes. He talked to Evelyn in a way he didn't talk to most people. She talked to him in a way that most people didn't dare. I overheard pieces of their conversations, not intentionally, just the way you overhear things when you're sanding a fence board 8 feet from two people talking on a porch. She asked him about his daughter once, just asked plainly, the way she asked everything. I kept my eyes on the board. He told her the short version first. Portland, 2 years of silence. His fault, more or less. She didn't offer sympathy, and she didn't offer advice. She just waited. And in that waiting, I've thought about this, in that waiting was a kind of respect. She was treating him like a person who already knew what he needed to do and just hadn't done it yet, which was exactly right. I thought keeping the worst of myself away from her was protection, he said on the third Saturday. I was closer that time. I'd moved to the gate post, which was maybe 10 feet from the porch steps where they were sitting. It rarely is, Evelyn said. Keeping people away from what you are doesn't protect them. It teaches them you don't trust them with the truth. James was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to fix it. Start, she said. That's all you do. I kept my eyes on the gate post. I was not going to be the one who looked over. I had my own conversations with her across those weeks. Shorter ones, because Evelyn distributed her attention the way she distributed her soup, fairly and according to who needed it. With me, she was direct and occasionally funny in a dry way that snuck up on you. She asked about my writing, about the chapter, about what 53 years on a motorcycle had felt like from the inside. Like growing up very slowly and very fast at the same time, I told her once. She looked at me. That's just life, she said. The bike just makes it louder. I laughed. I hadn't expected to laugh, which made it better. I asked her about Harold. She told me things. The blue mug with the chip on the rim, the Route 66 drive in the car with no air conditioning, the argument about the Albuquerque exit that had apparently never been fully resolved. She told me these things without sadness, or rather with a sadness that had been so thoroughly integrated into her daily life that it had become something else, a texture rather than a wound. Do you miss him every day? I asked. Every day, she said. But missing isn't the same as not being all right. I'm always confused when people mix those up. The fourth Saturday was the day things shifted, in a way I felt but couldn't have described at the time. Patricia, Evelyn's daughter, had called during the work hours, which was new. I only know what Evelyn told me afterward. Patricia had heard from the neighbor Dorothy about the motorcycles. She wanted to know if her mother was safe. Evelyn told her she was safer than she'd been in a long time. And then she said something to her daughter, something I wasn't there for, something private. And the result of it was that Patricia said she wanted to visit. Soon, not spring. Evelyn said all right. When she came back out to the yard after the call, she looked at me. "My daughter is coming to visit," she said. The way she said it carried something. Not quite surprise, not quite satisfaction. More like the expression of a person watching something they'd given up on suddenly decide to arrive after all. "That's good," I said. "It is," she said, and went back to watching us work. The moment I remember most from that fourth Saturday happened near the end of the day, when the light had gone that orange and long that Kansas light goes in October. Danny Pruitt came and sat on the repaired porch steps near Evelyn. He had his back to most of us, and his voice was low, but I was close enough. He asked her how she lived alone for so long without disappearing. That was the word he used, disappearing. And I understood immediately what he meant. Not physically, but the other way. The way a person disappears when no one is looking for them. She told him, you don't disappear by continuing to show up. To yourself first, to whoever shows up at your door second. She told him that 4 Saturdays in a row wasn't disappearing. He said he wasn't doing it for himself. She told him that's not how it works. He was quiet for a moment, and then I saw it. I was there. I'm telling you exactly what I saw. His eyes filled. He blinked it back fast, the way young men do when they think the world is watching. But Evelyn saw it, and she let it stand. She didn't look away, and she didn't speak, and she didn't do the thing people do where they rush to make hard feelings smaller. She just let it count. I've thought about that moment almost as much as I've thought about her standing at the door in the storm, because it's the same thing at the bottom. It's the same instinct. Open the door. Count everyone in. Make sure no one gets left outside. That was who she was. It wasn't performance, and it wasn't heroism. It was just how she operated, as if every person who came within range of her attention deserved to be fully seen, and as if fully seeing someone was the most ordinary thing in the world. Danny Pruitt came back every Saturday after that. He still comes, as far as I know. He got a tattoo on his left forearm the following spring. Small, clean lines, a house with a porch light on. He didn't tell anyone what it meant. He didn't need to. I'm going to tell you about the end of this story, but I want you to understand something first. It doesn't end. That's the thing about the kind of thing that happened in Millhaven. It doesn't close. It just keeps going in directions you didn't plan for, which is the only kind of story worth telling. Patricia arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the big work day. I know because James told me, and James knew because Evelyn had mentioned it the Saturday before. Casually, the way she mentioned most things that mattered to her, which was to say briefly and without emphasis, as if drawing too much attention to something might spook it. I didn't meet Patricia until the Christmas gathering, but James met her briefly when she came out to the yard on her second day there. He'd stopped by to drop something off, a storm window measurement Carol had asked him to check, and Patricia was in the yard pulling dead stalks from the flower beds. He described her to me afterward as, looks like her mother, talks like someone who's been apologizing to herself for a while. I thought that was a pretty accurate x-ray of a person from a 30-second interaction. What I know about those 4 days comes mostly from Evelyn, who told me about them in the incremental way she told most things. A detail here, a detail there, across several Saturdays. Patricia fixed the kitchen cabinet. She drove to the cemetery where Harold was buried and came back quiet. She sat in the living room for an hour without the television, and Evelyn brought her tea, and neither of them spoke, and that was what was needed. Was it good? I asked the Saturday after. It was a start, Evelyn said, which coming from her was high praise. James called his daughter the week after Patricia's visit. I know the date because he told me. A Thursday evening, sitting outside the chapter house, same spot where he'd told me about the letter. He'd said he was going to do it for 3 weeks and kept finding reasons not to. And then one evening, he just did it. He said he picked up the phone the way you get on a motorcycle when you haven't ridden in too long. You stop thinking about it and you just go. She didn't hang up. They talked for an hour. He found out her son's name, Marcus, 4 years old, liked trucks. James drove to Portland the following week. Rental car, not the bike. He wanted it to feel like an arrival, he said. I told him that was the smartest thing I'd ever heard him say. He told me that was a low bar. I agreed that it was. He called me from Portland. I don't think he meant to get emotional on the phone. James didn't do that as a rule. But there was something in his voice when he described standing on the sidewalk outside Lauren's apartment. How she'd come outside and they'd stood there in the specific uncertainty of people who love each other and have forgotten the mechanics of it. How she'd stepped forward. How he had put his arms around her. She didn't let go for a while, he said. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the correct response. Marcus was watching, he said, just standing there in his rain boots, watching us, completely calm, like it was the most normal thing. It was the most normal thing, I said. He sent me a photo, blurry, the way his photos always were. James had never learned to tap the screen to focus, and I had given up trying to teach him. But you could see the three of them clearly enough, a big man with a gray beard, being careful not to take up too much space, a woman holding his arm, a small boy in rain boots, looking directly at the camera, with the expression of someone fully prepared to be pleased by whatever came next. I still have that photo. The Christmas gathering at Evelyn's house was not a work day. It was, I think, the first time we'd come without a job to do. And there was a brief collective uncertainty about that. Like working dogs not sure what to do with an afternoon off. But it resolved quickly the way things resolve when the place and the people are right. There were maybe 30 of us. Carol brought a poinsettia. Danny Pruitt brought a tin of his mother's cookies and presented them with a solemnity that made me like him more than I already did. Robert Hatch came early and rearranged the chairs with his characteristic quiet efficiency. Someone had strung a single line of lights along the new porch railing. I don't know who, and I didn't ask, because some things are better without attribution. Patricia was there. She had come back. Not spring, not someday, but December, 2 months after her first visit, because apparently something had shifted in the arrangement between her and the calendar. She stood in the kitchen for the first 20 minutes with the careful wariness of someone withholding judgment. Then Danny Pruitt showed her a photo of the motorcycle he was rebuilding, and she asked 3 technical questions in a row that clearly surprised him, and after that she was fine. I watched Evelyn move through the rooms of her house that evening. The kitchen, the living room, the porch where people kept drifting out to stand in the cold for a few minutes before coming back in. She moved the way she had always moved, steady, deliberate, without performance. She refilled cups and answered questions, and occasionally said something dry enough to produce a delayed laugh, which was her favorite kind. At some point in the evening, I found myself on the porch, alone with James. The December air was sharp enough to see your breath. Inside, someone had turned up the music, low, just enough to fill the rooms. We stood at the railing for a while, without talking, looking at the street where all of it had started. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said. "What?" "She counted us in." He said it quietly, not to me specifically, more to the air. In the middle of a tornado, she stood at the door and she counted every single one of us in. I looked at the cedar rail under my hands, pale and smooth, fitted exactly to the house it was built for. "Yeah," I said, "she did." He shook his head slowly, not disbelief, more like a man who has turned a thing over in his mind long enough to finally set it down. "I've been writing for 33 years, he said. "You'd think I'd have a better way to explain what she did." "Some things don't explain," I said. "They just are." He nodded once, went back inside. I stayed on the porch a little longer. I'm 72. My knees don't love the cold, but I've learned to negotiate with them. I thought about the road, the way I always think about the road. About what 53 years of it looks like when you lay it out end to end. All those miles, all those dawns, all those arrivals and departures, and stretches of flat highway where you could see tomorrow from today. I had ridden looking for things my whole life. Most riders do. Not everyone knows what they're looking for, but they're looking. I hadn't expected to find any of it on Alderman and Fifth in Millhaven, Kansas, in the house of a 97-year-old woman with a ceramic mug and 30 years of canned goods and a door she knew exactly what to do with. But there it was. Inside, Evelyn Carter was laughing at something. I could hear it through the door, low and clean, the laugh of a person who has lived long enough to know exactly when something is funny. The lights on the porch railing held steady in the cold air. The street was quiet. I put my hand on the cedar rail one more time. Then I turned and went inside where it was warm.